So, with the recent leaked screenshots from a cancelled God of War multiplayer project, those images say a lot about the team and what they were trying to make, and why Sony probably pulled the plug as well. Now, the shots show clearly Greek-style environments, caverns with yellow sulfur pools, and an armory tied to Hades. That detail mattered. If Hades is active in the armory, and timeline would have been before God of War 3, and a project was trying to perhaps fit into the established lore rather than make a totally separate timeline. The images looks like an early development work. There are set pieces, rooms, breakable pods, and what reads as a linear co-op runs, where a small team pushes through an area, fights enemies, and moves to the next zone. That layout points to a run-based PvE loop rather than a wide open world MMO. Now those runs would have to repeat for loot and progression, and that's where many live service PvE designs stumble. The screenshots hint at the mechanics meant to change the run's conditions. One army shot looks normal, another looks corroded and described as kind of maybe even cursed. That which suggests that the developers planned variants of some of the levels, like maybe a normal state, cursed state, and so on. And to, of course, have a little bit of a replayability value on that. I think that's a smart basic idea on paper, but the hard part is making those repeats feel fresh. If the loop is literally the same map with kind of a different lighting filler, players just won't stick around. And to work, a run systems needs varied encounters, meaningful rewards, and a progression pace that actually rewards returning players instead of just grinding the same corridor for an kind of a incremental loot. Now, Bluepoint Games doing this kind of a live source God of War always felt like a risky bet. Bluepoint has built its reputation on remakes and just polish. Demon's Souls, Shadow of the Colossus, and while the studio has talent, it's relatively small compared to the teams used to support live service games for years. Public profiles and listings put the studio at a roughly 70 plus people, which is fine for tight single player projects, but thin for a long running live service PvE product that needs regular new content, backend ups, and live ops teams. Now that doesn't mean that they couldn't have partnered up or grown, but it helps explain why leadership might have feared the cost and complexities of making a long-term live service succeed. Sony's wide live service push also factors into this. In early of 2025, Sony cancelled at least 2 unannounced live service projects, one from Bluepoint and one from Bend Studio. As part of the internal review of live service bets across PlayStation Studios. That review came after mixed results from an earlier efforts, and it looks like Sony decided to scale back where projects seem risky or underpowered. Bend, the studio behind Days Gone, has reportedly cut contractors after its live service project was cancelled, which shows these decisions had immediate human and development consequences. In short, this wasn't just one studio stumbling. Sony is reevaluating whether a lot of the single-player focused teams can pivot successfully into sustaining multiplayer or a live service work. So what exactly does the leak tell us about how the game would have felt? From the screenshots and commentary, the core loop looks like cooperative mini-adventures, escort-style hubs, or armories where you buy or upgrade gear, then run out on short, combat-focused levels that reward resources. The armory tied to the Hades implies a vendor upgrade loop where Hades sells or upgrades gear, and a cursed normal state suggests modifiers that change loot or danger. Visually, the Greek motifs were back, which might have been a cool throwback for the fans who remembered earlier God of War entries, and it could have let Bluepoint lean on to more mythological boss fights and set pieces. But visuals and lore aren't a substitute for a robust live loop that keeps players invested after dozens of runs. That's the core difficulty. Now there's also a question of design fit. Single player studios often scale at the handcrafted moments, scripted encounters, cinematic pacing, and a careful enemy placement. live service PvE needs a different muscle. Systems that can be recombined, procedural or modular encounter designs, loot economy balancing, and a long-term community support. Plenty of other teams that try to convert single-player expertise into a live service have struggled. It's a long list. Think of the projects that never found a sustainable loop, or that hit huge technical and engagement problems. That's not a knock on the talent at the Bluepoint or Bend. It's reality about the different design disciplines. And given Sony's broader review and a small size of some of these teams, cutting the projects may have been a pragmatic choice rather than a failure on a vision alone. And what about Bluepoint's next move? Job listings and hiring pushes suggest Bluepoint is refocusing on a third-person melee combat and a single-player experiences. That could mean a return to remakes or a new single-player IP that plays to their strengths. For Sony, the lesson seems to be that live service hits require the right teams, big live ops events, investments, and years of support. And you can't bolt that on to the studio that hasn't built those systems from ground up without risks. At the higher level, this leak and cancellation are a useful reminder. Big brands like God of War can draw attention to experimental formats, but brand recognition alone won't fix core live service problems. Players expect meaningful variety, fair progression, and long-term content that justifies coming back. If those pillars aren't solid, a project can look good on paper and in screenshots but fall apart when costs of the content and the complexities of operations hit reality. Sony's decision to pull multiple projects indicates that the company is trying to avoid repeating costly mistakes and shifting resources back towards safer bets, single-player tentpoles, and measured multiplayer experiments. Now, as for how I feel, I'm not surprised. Sony canceled the Bluepoint God of War live service project. The screenshots are interesting to the fans that gives us a peek at what might have been. That leans into more of a Greek myth and co-op runs, but the core problem is replayability, a sustainable loot drops, and the scale of a kind of a live ops needed. We're always going to be serious hurdles for a smaller studio. From a player perspective, I'd rather see Bluepoint rebuild their strength, just give us another polished single player, maybe even a remake, than watch how they pull the IP and just make it into whatever the code is multiplayer that they would go for, and it wasn't even that well done. If Sony wants a home run live service, they'll need the right team, the right time, and the right expectations. Until then, cancellations like these are a disappointment indeed. But I think it might be the right call. Well, other than that, do let me know down in the comments as well. What do you think about all this? Are you disappointed about that this game never is going to get its time of light of day? Perhaps maybe you're, don't really mind it. Maybe you already foreseen that it's just not going to be a feasible reality for them to be able to pull this off. Well, other than that, tell me down in the comments. I'd love to read it. Like and subscribe to see you guys all, and have a wonderful day.